You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Welcome to the Health Hub on Radio Maria Canada, exploring cutting-edge health and wellness information and therapies, helping you to take your health to the next level. I'm your host, Cathy Biase, and I'm an holistic nutritionist and a professional cancer coach. In our show today, the conversation challenges an emotionally charged topic in modern health and environmental discourse: microplastics, ocean waste, and the global push to eliminate plastics altogether. But what happens if fear outpaces facts? Joining me today is Dr. DeArmitt, a globally recognized materials scientist, author, and one of the leading independent voices in the world on plastics and the environment. With decades of experience and thousands of peer-reviewed studies analyzed, he's made it his mission to separate science from sensationalism. This episode isn't about opinions, it is about evidence, and we are diving into what the science actually says about microplastics, why banning plastics can sometimes do more harm than good, and how misinformation may be shaping the policies that impact all of us. Stay tuned, everybody. We will be back in just a few minutes to speak with Dr. DeArmitt.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase.
Welcome back, everybody. Please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, X, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on those occasions. Dr. DeArmitt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, you're probably going to really challenge a lot of what people have been thinking about microplastics and toxins, myself as well, because, we are definitely taught a certain way. But I respect the science of what you do, and I think that this is the key to really getting a clearer picture of what is going on when we talk about microplastics. When people hear microplastics are in our bodies, what are they assuming is the truth that's going on?
Right. It sounds scary, doesn't it? In fact, I was surprised when I first heard that. And then I started to check the science, because a lot of what we hear is very sensational out of context. So I started to look into particles in the body. What do we know about that? And it turned out the first ever publication on particles getting inside our body and into our tissues was in 1844 in German. In fact, I had to get a book in Old German, and I had to get my wife to read it because she's German, to double check that it said what people were claiming it said. So this guy did experiments on dogs and showed that if you fed them a bunch of starch, you ended up with starch inside them and starch particles flying around. So what at first seems shocking and unique to plastic is not new, and it's not unique to plastic. Every kind of particle we're exposed to can get inside of our bodies, and dust basically gets everywhere.
Well, okay, then in terms of toxicology, of poisoning, what determines what is actually really harmful to us?
Yes, perfect question. So as you know, toxicology depends on dose and the toxicity of something. So if you look at oxygen, that is very healthy, around 20%. That's what it is in air, as we learn at school. And if you go up to 100% oxygen, you feel great for a while and then you die. So if we take something which we think of as safe, oxygen, and get too much of it, that's a bad thing. And that's true of pretty much everything, all the medicines we take, even soy sauce has so much salt in it that if you were to drink a large bottle of it, you could die. And we don't think of table salt as particularly toxic, but it is toxic in high enough amounts. So people have done these studies, and this is a very important point you bring up, because the average person is afraid of plastic particles because they think it's new, unstudied, and a threat. It's definitely not new because we have 50 years of studies. It's definitely not unstudied because we have more than 2,000 scientific studies on it over those 50 years. And it's not a threat because it's non-toxic. And you might say, well, if everything's toxic, how toxic is it, right? Because everything's toxic at some dose. They have not even found the toxic amount of plastic. So the safe amount, the NOAEL, that's the toxicological abbreviation for the long-term toxicity of plastic, is a coffee cup a day of microplastic. You could eat a coffee cup a day for the rest of your life and nothing would happen to you, according to long-term testing.
How have we gone so far to the left with this? What would be, when we're talking about sensationalism, there's, sensationalizing whatever for profit.
Yes.
You see that a lot on social media. Why has this become so sensationalized without scientific backing?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot. So the scientific consensus on microplastic is there's no harm, and yet 93% of media articles claim that there is. So scientists have literally studied it and proved that the media's lied to us. So why did they do that? There's a couple of reasons. One is, of course, there are competitors to the plastics industry. And so some of those, I've been told by lawyers, they know for a fact that some of those industries are spending money to demonize plastic and drive customers to them. So they say, throw away your plastic cutting boards and come and buy my lovely wooden one, or throw away your PET bottle and come and buy my stainless steel or glass one. So that's a part of it. But that is only part of it. Another aspect is NGOs, so these so-called environmental groups, and even Greenpeace. So the former president of Greenpeace, Patrick Moore, left and said that they now just tell lies for money. That's written in his books. So he left in disgust and said they gave up on science, they gave up on the environment, and now they'll just say, according to him, they'll just say anything to get your money. And if we look at microplastics, we can see the World Wildlife Fund told us that we eat a credit card of plastic a week, microplastic. Science says that would take 10,000 years to do. So that's the magnitude of claims that people are making, which then lead to donations. They still have that up on their website with a big juicy donate now button. So that's the second factor. And the third one is there's a lot of billionaires around the world who are against plastic, and they're on record as saying that they're funding these anti-plastic campaigns to make sure that people don't like plastics.
I have to admit, it's ingrained in my teaching. When I'm working with clients, I deal with cancer patients, a lot of cancer patients. And I thought the science was there for instance, one thing that I say frequently is don't leave water bottles in the car in the heat, because the plastics can leach into the water. So I'm a part of this chain, it sounds like.
Well, you have a good defense because there's a thing called the illusory truth effect. And that is a scientific thing that basically if you repeat a lie enough times to even somebody with a very high IQ, like I'm sure you have,
thanks.
they will believe it, because why wouldn't you, right? It just sounds reasonable after a while. That's how brainwashing works. So we've all been brainwashed into believing things that aren't true. And specific to your PET case, let me give you an example. So hardly anybody is aware that these used PET bottles are used to save lives. And that happens to millions of people in poor countries. They take this well water, which is full of bacteria, gives you diarrhea, and you die if you drink it. So they take this unsafe well water, they put it in an empty PET bottle, and they leave it on the roof for a day in Africa and these other countries. And that temperature from being on the roof and the sunlight from being on the roof sterilizes the water, so it's safe to drink and it saves lives. So these single-use bottles don't have to be single-use. They can still be useful at the end of their lives, and they're saving lives, and no one knows about it. It's called SODIS, solar water disinfection. And specific to your point, scientists thought exactly what you just thought. They thought, well, what happens to that water if it's baking in a PET bottle all day in the scorching sunlight with UV and a huge amount of heat? aren't there chemicals coming out of that bottle? And they studied it and they didn't find anything. There was nothing alarming whatsoever coming out of the PET bottle because there are no additives in a PET bottle. There's nothing to come out. So scientists have studied that. Even if you were to take your PET bottle and bake it at 70 degrees, Celsius up on the roof for a day in scorching sunlight, there's no health hazard.
Wow, that kind of just blows my mind.
Yeah,
I have to ask about saran
everything
paper
I say
too.
is backed with science, so I'll send you the studies. If you challenge me, it's all on the website. It's all at the Plastics Research Council. There's 250 studies there, and it's in the free book. My book is free, so every single thing I'm saying is backed by science, and you can, click on it and check it yourself.
I don't even understand why that would be perpetuated, something like that. I don't understand that misinformation.
Yeah, well, looks to see who's benefiting from it, right?
uh,
The glass bottle industry and other people are. So these billionaires are on record. So Michael Bloomberg's one of them. He's literally said he's funding Beyond Petrochemicals and Beyond Plastics, and those are two NGOs that go around demonizing plastics. They say things which are just really silly and they're not supported by science. And the reason he does that, because I didn't understand it either. I asked ChatGPT, why are billionaires like Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg, and there's a couple in Australia too, doing this? And ChatGPT said this is how they're thinking. They think plastic is made from petrochemicals, and petrochemicals means fossil fuel and greenhouse gas. So therefore, plastic must be bad. And that sounds very reasonable until you check what happens when you replace plastic. So let's say you convince everybody plastic is bad and they should move to metal, glass, and paper. The result of that is 4 times more waste, more cost, which harms poor people, 3 times more greenhouse gas, and you end up ironically using twice as much fossil fuel because those other materials need more energy to make. So these billionaires, in their great wisdom, are spending millions and millions of dollars to campaign against their own wishes, which is to reduce fossil fuel usage and greenhouse gas.
Well, what about all these visuals of plastics contaminating the waters and the oceans and all these cleanup committees and charities?
Yes.
No, they're not viable.
No, it's total nonsense. So the first thing to say about that is we shouldn't have anything in the ocean, right? There is an alarming amount of rubbish in the ocean. They scuttle ships there, nuclear submarines and ships with bombs and chemical weapons and all kinds of things are in the ocean that shouldn't be there. But I ran the numbers because we're told that the ocean is, that there's a giant floating island the size of Texas. Doesn't exist. There's not a single picture of it or satellite image in the world. It's just not there. You can swim through it and not know you're in these areas with a tiny bit more plastic. So that's one myth dispelled. But let me give you an idea how little plastic there is. So we're being told that the ocean is choking in plastic, drowning in plastic. So imagine you took the world with 8 billion people, which is how many people there are, right? And you took away everything else. There's just 8 billion humans walking around on a naked planet. And now we add one squirrel. And then we say the world is drowning in squirrels. That is how much plastic is going into the ocean. So the 8 billion people represent the amount of water, and the squirrel represents the amount of plastic going into the ocean. And we're being told that 8 billion people are being drowned by one squirrel. And I'm not saying, again, that it should be there, but I am saying we shouldn't be lying about it and teaching our kids nonsense at school. We shouldn't be spending hundreds of millions on cleanup operations to clean up an emergency that doesn't exist.
This is like turning things totally on end for me from, me and probably a lot of people understand to be the truth.
I was shocked too because I didn't know about this. This all started when my 2 daughters were told lies at school by their teacher, and that made me angry because as a scientist, I care that my daughters are told things that are true. And that's what my whole crusade is about. I don't care if you buy plastic or not. I choose not to buy plastic. I'm drinking from a glass now because I prefer it. I'm sitting in a wool jacket because I prefer it. But I also think that we shouldn't be making policies. We shouldn't be teaching our kids fiction at school.
Is there any causal evidence linking microplastics to disease?
No.
Or we're still at a correlation sort of stage? Not
Neither.
Neither.
So I've read there are more than 2,000 studies on microplastic over 50 years, as I mentioned. And I've read 600 of them myself, including the experimental section, which really tells you whether the science is solid or not. I've never read a single study that showed any evidence of harm. So the scientific consensus is that there is no harm. And there are a few studies that claim to show health effects, but when you read them, they're just nonsense. And here's why they're nonsense. They use 1 million times more plastic particles than are actually in the environment. So we just talked about how using 5 times more oxygen than the regular amount is lethal. And it's the same with any particle. If you use 1 million times too much of sawdust, I mean, sawdust gives you cancer, right? Nobody talks about it. Wood dust causes cancer. Quartz from your garden. If you go out in the garden, or if you're a farmer and you're tilling up the soil, you can be exposed to levels of quartz that give you cancer. It's carcinogenic. IARC, class 1 carcinogen for humans. And you can be exposed to amounts which are unsafe. And yet plastic is completely non-toxic and non-carcinogenic, and we're obsessing over it.
What do you think the biggest, in my mind, I have an idea because it impacts me, a couple of times a week. We have been told that plastic is bad. We have switched out many, many things. Is there a switch out that has been done in air, in your opinion, that has really impacted the environment in a negative way? Meaning, like, for instance, we've gone from plastic straws to paper straws. Is there one piece of environmental trade-off here that has happened that you feel has really had a negative impact, trading from plastic to something else?
All right. That's a great question. So I'll answer it in 2 parts. Firstly, scientists studied whether replacing plastic decreases impact or increases it. So they did hundreds and hundreds of studies, and they found out that 9 times out of 10, replacing plastic increases harm to the environment. On the other hand, so it is an increase almost every time when it comes to straws, when it comes to bags, when it comes to drink containers, when it comes to clothes, all of those, when it comes to pipes, if you replace plastic pipes, things get worse. Almost everything that they measured, it got worse when you replace plastic. But none of them are really bad for the environment. And here's the key thing. A scientist also studied, forget about plastic for a second, what would actually help the environment? And the answers are flying less, driving less, and eating less meat. Those are the 3 biggest things we can do. And the thing that's wrong with those is that they actually involve a sacrifice that nobody wants to make. So instead, they talk about bags and straws all day because they want to feel like good people and look good to their friends without actually making a sacrifice it would take to be a good person and help the environment.
So when we trade out our plastic bags for the grocery store to paper or, whatever other bag there are, I think most of us in our mind's eye think we're doing a positive thing for the environment. But my question for you is, how is plastic, again, you're turning my thoughts completely on ear. I feel that I can compost paper. I can compost the straws. Plastic is just clogging up the system. What's the argument against that? Like, I feel like compostability is a big thing on people's mind when they feel they're doing something good by changing out of plastics.
Right. Yeah, well, again, these environmental groups, they have graphics showing a plastic bag, and they claim it takes 400 years to degrade. So scientists went and actually measured it. They put plastic outside, just sitting on the ground, and it vanished in less than a year, not 400 years like the World Wildlife Fund and Greenpeace tell us. So we're being told things with zero evidence. And the ironic part is this, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. If you went to Home Depot or Lowe's and you asked for a gutter made of plastic that was going to last 500 years, they'd laugh in your face and throw you out of the store. I mean, the idea is preposterous. We literally see pieces of plastic degrading in front of our eyeballs every day. The headlights on our car go yellow and foggy. The garden furniture outside goes all chalky and the legs snap off after a while. So it's very strange that we see with our own eyes these plastic things falling to pieces. And yet when an NGO, when an environmental group tells us, oh, it was going to last 500 years, we somehow abandon our own senses and believe them. So scientists have got thousands of studies. Plastics do degrade, and they do biodegrade as well. And that's in my book. And the reason is simple. It's made of carbon-carbon bonds, which is the same as what trees are made of. Trees are made of carbon-carbon bonds, also a polymeric material, a cellulose. Our skin is kept elastic by collagen, which is also carbon-carbon bonds. And DNA that our bodies and our life itself is made from is carbon-carbon bonds. So plastics have the same chemistry as these other things, which we know degrade very rapidly. And so it should be no surprise that plastics do too.
Just before we go to break, I haven't, because again, like I said a couple of times already, it's really changing, how I'm looking at things.
Well, I'll give credit to you because most people would rather stick to the lies they believe now than go. It takes mental anguish to overturn something you believe or at least question it. So I applaud you for making the effort. It's not easy.
It just never, it never seemed to me to be something to question because it sounds logical that things could be toxic, like plastics can be toxic. The smell, when you leave your water bottle in the car, it tastes different. Certain smells as plastics, or the common person, me being one of them, you can equate it to toxicity. But the other thing too is, things like saunas and the science behind saunas and testing sweat and detoxifying and all these protocols for detoxifying out chemicals, some of which have come from plastics, seems very knee deep in evidence. So where has that gone wrong?
Well, that's the thing. You see, I'm a plastic formulator. I'm the person who decides what goes in plastic. So I know what's in it. I was on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley talking about, vaginal mesh and hernia mesh, which they put in the body. It's made of plastic, never should have been there. But and because it was the wrong material, I wasn't defending plastic. I was defending women, and we got settlements for 9,000 women by showing that was the wrong plastic. And ironically, it degraded too quickly in the body. It was supposed to last decades, and it lasts a couple of years.
And did it degrade into some sort of a harmful chemical?
No, it degrades into little fragments which irritate you, just like having a splinter would do.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I know what's in plastic. If you take polyethylene, let's say from that grocery bag we mentioned, it's 99.9% polyethylene and a tiny, tiny smidge of stabilizer to make it not degrade too quickly, ironically. So, and that's all that's in there. And that stabilizer is as safe as the plastic. You can eat a cup load a day. That's the NOAEL. That's the toxic limit for that stabilizer is a cup load a day. It's less toxic than sugar and caffeine in our coffee or a lot of the things that we eat.
Well, who determines the toxic limit? Like what is a safe limit? Who determines that?
Well, that's done by animal testing, the same as everything else. They tested on rats and mice and stuff like that. And so just to give you an idea, right? So there's PTFE pans. They tell you you're gonna scratch the pan and it's made of PFAS and it's gonna poison you.
Yes.
So they took rats and they replaced 25% of their diet with Teflon microplastics. They fed that to the rats, 25% of their food gone and replaced with Teflon PFAS for 3 months, over 3 months, nothing happened because it's non-toxic. They did the same with polyethylene and PET and polypropylene. All the common plastics we have been tested for decades. That's why the FDA allows us to eat our food off of them, because they're non-toxic. They're some of the least toxic materials anyone's ever measured.
I've cleaned my house out of the plastic dishes and the plastic forks and it's going to take a minute for me to get my head around all of this for sure. But let's take a break here. When we come back, we're going to continue this because this is fascinating to me. Everybody, hold on tight. We'll be back in just a minute.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Cathy Biase.
Welcome back to the Health Hub, and let's continue this conversation because my mind is just spinning here. Okay, when it comes to plastics and toxicity and so forth, two approaches maybe to the next question I have. Can we detox? Is our body able to detox microplastics? Do we need to detox microplastics? What is your thought process on that?
Yes. So let's look at, first of all, we just said that the toxic dose has not been even found. It's more than a coffee cup a day of microplastic. So let's compare that to how much we're actually exposed to. And the answer is 0.01 grams of microplastic per 70 years. Our whole lifetime exposure is 0.01 grams. And what happens to that material? Just like all the other particles, it goes right through us. Our gut does not absorb particles. A very, very tiny proportion of all particles, not just plastic, does get through. through, but I can tell you how much it is. 99.7% of particles go right through us. Some of the other ones do end up, not just plastic, all of them, end up inside us, and then our immune system just flushes them out. So there is no need. There's a recent Netflix called Plastic Detox, and you can't detox from something that's not toxic, right? It just doesn't make sense. So if you are worried about something, worry about quartz that gives you cancer. Worry about wood dust that gives you cancer if you breathe too much. Worry about leather dust that gives you cancer if you breathe too much. These are IARC Class 1 proven carcinogens. Worry about something that's actually toxic if you want to worry, not about plastic is 1/100,000th of the particles we're ingesting and consuming. So if you're falling asleep at night and you don't dare to breathe because you're worried about the million particles you and I will have each breathed in during this interview, if you're not worried about that, then why would you be worried about 100,000th of that, which is what the plastic part is? It just doesn't make any logical sense.
Have we hit on the biggest myth when it comes to microplastics and plastics? Or is there still a grand one that we haven't talked about yet?
That's the main stuff, I think. The main thing is that perspective. It's 100,000th of all the particles we're exposed to, and it's just part of dust. And I've never met a single person who worries about dust. So why would you worry about 100,000th of the dust we consume? It's like fear of the monster under the bed, right? We feel like there's some missing thing, and people always tell me, well, the science is evolving. I'm like, no, it isn't. There's 2,000 studies and the answer to every single question anyone's ever asked me. And not only that, I published my book, and before I did, I sent it to professors all around the world, and they all checked it and endorsed it. And then some of them said, can I join you and form a non-profit to come and share the science, because the public have been so grossly misled. I've got professors from all around the world working with me unpaid because they believe so strongly in this message.
It's very
including a
interesting.
toxicologist.
No, I'm really going to put myself here out on a limb, because this could be a very, very non-smart question to ask. But are there any naturally occurring plastics in the environment, or are all plastics man-made?
No, there are. So the first thing to say is that a plastic is a type of long molecule. And long molecules, as we just discussed, include enzymes and proteins and collagen and DNA and so forth, and cellulose that trees are made of. So these are all very much the same kind of molecule as plastic. When it comes to nature-made plastic, there's one called PHB, and you can go and buy stuff. You can buy cutlery made out of PHB if you want to. There's polyhydroxybutyrate. And that is something that bacteria grow, and you know how we store our extra energy as fat? They store it as PHB. So they have these little particles of plastic called PHB inside the cell, which they make on purpose to save that energy in case they need to draw on it later on. And that's been commercialized. So they've taken these bacteria, filled them with, almost completely filled with their equivalent of fat, which is called PHB. And then they kill off the bacteria part, wash it, and then make plastic stuff out of it. That's on the market. It was introduced in 1982 by ICI.
Wasn't such a dumb question then.
No, it was a great question.
Then the plastics that are man-made, is it possible that there are additives to the plastics that are being created that can be harmful?
There used to be. So in the olden days, people used things like lead-based stabilizers for one type of plastic. And then they just the same as you had leaded glass, and people realized that wasn't a great plan. They did the same with plastic. This is decades ago now. So all that stuff is very, very strictly regulated. I have a book in front. I know we're not on video now, but you can probably still see me. I'm holding up a book. And this is a
Indirect
book.
Food Additives and Polymers.
Right. And look how thick this book is. That's a book all about the chemicals you're allowed to put in plastic, how much you're allowed to put in, and all the safety testing that's been done. This stuff is regulated to the extent that I'm surprised any plastic company is still in business. The amount of regulations people have to comply with around the world to put anything on the market is truly spectacular.
But can those variables cause toxicity that is harmful?
In theory, let's say you wanted to make a toxic plastic. You could do it, right? You could just shove it full of toxic things, but you're not allowed to put that on the market. What they do is they put in things which have been tested in amounts which are known to be safe, and then they measure to see does any of that come out of the plastic? So there's tons of experiments where you fill a bottle of plastic, like I talked about with the PET, and then you leave it for a certain amount of time and measure to see if any of those additives came out and whether it's toxic or not. So all that science is done.
Okay. Now, with respect to history, are plastics a relatively new material, or is there a long history of plastics in our humanity?
Yeah, the area is about 50 years old.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons that, paper is man-made too, right? But nobody thinks of it as unnatural. So over time, humans become comfortable with stuff. Concrete, that's not natural either, but nobody really reacts to it like it's a bad thing, even though there's 80 times more concrete than plastic in the world, or 100 times more. So plastic is so new that people perceive it as synthetic, and that's one of the reasons we have a reaction. A lot of people have this like natural is best idea, and that doesn't actually work. I looked up what are the top 5 most toxic things humans have ever discovered, and 4 of them are natural. Botox is number 1. That's the most toxic thing you've ever encountered, and people inject it in their faces. The only one on the top 5 list was botulinum toxin, Botox. That was one, and the only other one that was synthetic was a nerve gas that the Russians invented. So this natural is best idea sounds lovely, but it doesn't work.
Okay, I'm going to re-ask this question. I'm not sure if I asked this, and I just lost track of what you said. But what keeps popping up in my head is how long does it take to degrade plastics versus these other? So we're exchanging plastic bags for paper bags. The degradation, it's a huge difference, is it not?
No. So I mentioned before that we put a paper bag, and they put plastic bags out in the environment, and they were gone in 9 months. They disintegrated into particles, and then those particles degraded into nothing. And they did the same with paper bags in the same experiment, and they degraded at the same rate.
But what is the environmental context of the degradation of plastic bags?
So plastic is degraded by light, by heat, by oxygen, by insects, by fungi, by bacteria, all of those things that attack paper or anything else, or trees or plants, they also attack plastics.
So the buildup, the buildup of plastics that we tend to see, is it because A, that's trying to be sensationalism, or B, they're not being processed properly for degradation?
What we tend to see in the media is these pictures of a lot of litter, right? So you see these giant expanses of litter. And that's a really key point, right? So the problem, if you ask people why they are against plastic, and they say, well, it's too much material. And then you say, well, it's 0.5% of all material, right? And they're like, oh my God, well, that can't be the real reason they're against plastic if it's less than 1% of material we use. And then you say to them, what about waste? And they say, well, it's all the waste. It's all plastic is waste. And you say, well, it's less than 1% of waste and proven to reduce waste. And they say, oh, okay. And then they come up with the degradation, and it goes on. And you dispel every myth about ocean plastics, microplastics, toxicity. What it comes down to at the end of the day, people do not like to see plastic litter. That is what people react to. Those are the pictures we see of plastic bottles floating in the ocean. And that is why people want degradables, because they think, well, then we can just drop it on the floor, and like Harry Potter and his wand, it will just disappear. That's why they want degradables. And the trouble with that is degradables actually increase littering. As soon as people think, and they've studied this, as soon as people think this will degrade, they drop it on the floor twice as much as the non-degradable option. So moving to degradables increases carbon dioxide, increases harm, and increases costs, and increases littering. It doesn't help.
Well, you just answered the next question I had about what happens environmentally when we remove plastics, and that's the answer, correct? Or is there more to that answer?
Yeah, well, the good thing about plastic is you can tune the degradation rate. So if you take a polyethylene bag, it is very lightly stabilized. There's just a pinch of additive in there to stop it from degrading in less than the 6 months or a year that you'll need it to last. On the other hand, if you take a plastic pipe and you want it to last 100 years buried in the ground, then you can add more and better stabilizer to that plastic pipe so that now it lasts 100 years because that's what you want it to do. So that's a great thing about plastic. Although they do want to degrade quickly, Just like, if you took an apple and put it in the fridge and it goes brown, but if you squeeze lemon juice on it, it doesn't. That's because that's an antioxidant. So that's what they do with plastics. They want to degrade quickly, but the scientists add just enough of the right stabilizer to make it last as long as you want to.
Okay, I have to ask two questions or two things that pop into my head visually. And again, that's something that I have passed on to people. Saran wrap. That's a plastic, is it not?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so there has been a real push towards getting aluminum out, getting saran wrap out. Is that this another example of a notion that is not based on science? Especially saran wrap, and then they're talking, the real harm was plastics, Tupperware, saran being heated with food.
Yeah. There's no scientific evidence to back that idea. I'm sure the people who want to sell you wax paper will be delighted to tell you that it's safer, but there's studies showing that paper has got more toxic chemicals in it than plastic by far. I can send you a study that says that. There's studies showing toxicity from glass. There's studies showing toxicity and allergic reactions of nickel coming out of stainless steel. Nobody talks about any of that because they're so busy demonizing plastic. It's remarkable how there's even a group called the Food Packaging Forum, and they're funded by the metal and glass industry. And they deny it, but they spend all of their time attacking paper and plastic. So big surprise, right? I mean, they like to deny that that's why they're doing it. But if they really were genuine scientists, I'm surprised that they never point out the toxicity studies on glass and metals.
Wow. This is actually just blowing my mind. And the other visual I want to hit upon, because it's something that we've all seen, I even believe there was some Netflix show or some documentary on it, fishing gear and fishing nets.
Yes.
And all of that is very much seen as a contributor to the mass plastics that are in the oceans. How did this understanding emerge? And this has actually had policy aimed at it, has it not?
Yes, but the wrong policy. So if you look at what is in the gyres, these areas with a little bit of more plastic, they go out there with a net, right, and they scoop it up, and then scientists measure it. So the last measurement had 6,048 objects scooped up. 85% of that was fishing nets and gear. And that's important because these nets trap animals, even though they're not being used as nets anymore. They trap fish and kill them and everything. So that's a big deal. And that was 85% of what they found. And that's not what they're regulating. So they've specifically said United Nations are flying tens of thousands of people around the world to have meeting after meeting after meeting. And they've specifically said, we're going to ignore the fishing nets. We're not interested in regulating that or doing anything about it. What we're going to talk about is bags, straws, and bottles. Guess how much that was of these 6,048 objects? Fishing nets was 85%. Guess how much of it was stuff coming from us, the bags, straws, and bottles?
I'm going to say less than 1% because of another number you've thrown out there.
Yeah, it was 0.03%. So they're flying tens of thousands of people around to talk about, in fact, I calculated these UNEP meetings from the United Nations, they have done the same damage as 1 billion PET bottles, flying around, driving around in Escalades, talking about bags, bottles, and straws, and ignoring the nets, which is the actual problem, harming sea creatures, and is 85%. That is what happens when you don't follow the science, and you follow greed and wacko policies that don't follow evidence.
Well, the science, as with a lot of arguments, I guess science can be fudged as well in some way, shape, or form. And that's what the fudged science or the headlines are what, honestly, when we talk about policy, you almost have to think that it's the headlines that are creating the policies or the ideas to change policies. How do you distinguish between, or how should policy makers distinguish between what's hazard and risk when it becomes, when they're talking about plastics and microplastics? Like, how do they distinguish this? Because these policymakers are not scientists. So where do they look?
Well, usually they don't look at all.
Okay.
So, for example, if you were to, let's say you wanted to know whether a grocery bag should be made of plastic or something else, you can type in life cycle bag right now into your Google search bar, and you will find peer-reviewed life cycle studies that tell you which option has the least impact. There are 30 of them. So that's one way that I make sure the science isn't fudged. I download every single study. Most people read nothing. Some people read they try and search
The
for a study that
abstracts.
proves what they want to believe.
Yeah.
I read every single study there is. And then not only that, then I sent it to an expert, a life cycle analysis expert. That's his job, and said, what do you think of these studies? And he said, yes, according to every study ever done in the world, the plastic bag has the lowest impact.
Oh, it's the bias, I think, of the studies and the bias of the you can always find the answer you're looking for in science, I find.
Right.
And this is what is and then we listen to the policymakers who say that they're listening to the science, and here we are now not allowed to have plastic straws.
Yeah.
And the paper straws are awful.
Yeah.
If we're really looking to improve the environment, where should we be placing our priorities, do you think?
Well, as you said, they should start with science. So in the case of bags, I read 30 studies. That's all of them, to be sure, because you can fudge any one study.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the bags case, there is one study that claims paper bags are greener, but when you send it off to an expert, they say this is complete nonsense. And that's how you spot it. It's an outlier. And it's the same with pipes. Every study shows that plastic pipe has lower impact, apart from one study where they cheated. So that's one way to stop it, to spot nonsense. And the other way is to send it off to other people to verify. So when I read 6,000 studies and I got my book, then as I said, I sent it to professors in Germany and England and Sweden and all around Denmark and all around the world, Australia, and they endorsed it. The endorsements are on my website and asked to join me in spreading the truth. So that's another way to make sure that it's not nonsense. If I was a charlatan, let's say I was secretly paid by the plastics industry, and I wish I was, because I'm spending 1,000 hours a year unpaid to fight for the truth. If I was a charlatan, I would never in a million years send my book out to professors I've never even met and say, here, take a look at this load of nonsense I dreamt up. I would be cast out of the scientific community, right, for being a charlatan. But instead, they came back and offered to endorse it and join me. So that's another way you can tell it's not nonsense. And some policymakers have started coming to me. So I met the Minister of the Environment of Mexico. She's a scientist, and I showed her the evidence, and she completely changed her mind. And now she demands to see evidence before making policies.
Well, I guess the final question, because it's just something that's I've always kind of in my mind, I thought we changed over plastics for a lot of papers, the straws, the bags. Have you studied the impact on that transition? And I'm thinking about the trees and the cost of cutting the trees, and has that had an impact?
Yes, it has. So the guy who has the patent on plastic bags, he was a Swedish guy. I have the patent on my computer here. I think it's from 1910. And he created the plastic bag, to save the forest, because Sweden's full of forests. So he wanted to save the forest. He made the polyethylene bag, the t-shirt bag, so they call it, and he would carry it in his pocket and reuse it. And so they calculated to replace the plastic bags with paper would mean cutting down 4 million extra trees every year. It means 10 times more waste, because the plastic bag weighs 6 grams and the paper bag weighs 60 grams. It means more waste, more water used, more pollution, more carbon dioxide, more cost. And so they've done a couple of post-bag ban studies. There was one in Maine and one in New Jersey, where the politician said, hey, I'm going to commission a study to show what a genius I am. Let's look at what happened. Look at all the good that came out of my bag ban. And both of the studies came back and said things got dramatically worse after the ban. So they had way more impact and, ironically, more sales of plastic.
Interesting. Yeah, you've completely given me tons of things to think about and change my mind about. Where can people find out more about your research, get your book, find out, maybe contact you if they're interested in going a little bit deeper into this?
Yeah. So go to Plastics Research Council, that's one word, .com. And there you'll find a video that explains it all. There's a summary page in case you don't have a lot of time. And then there's 250 studies there, all linked, so you can check them yourself. And when I quote a study, I do it verbatim. I copy and paste from the study. So there's no spin, there's no nothing. It's the words of the author of the study with a citation, so you can go check it yourself.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, thank you so much for this. This is really giving me, and I'm sure everyone who's listening, a lot to think about. I really appreciate not only your time, but the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Plastic is not perfect, but it's like Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government apart from all the other ones we've tried. So
yeah.
it's maybe the least bad option that we've got.
We need to rethink things, maybe.
Thank you.
Get away from the scare tactics perhaps as well. But yes, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate it. Everybody, we will talk to you next week on the Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by Cathy Biase, here on Radio Maria Canada.